about the first three process is assimilation? Is it assimilation, or then the last three are accumulation? Or both
Right.
accumulation?
Right.
Assimilation, right? And also, we talk about that, puke up or just regurgitation is happening at the adapting.
Right. Basically,
at adapting.
The children aren't able to, they don't adapt what comes in to really be good soul food. So eventually they regurgitate it. They can't digest it.
Yeah. So adapting is a kind of like a, also warmth.
Yes.
Warmth, and then the two is like a rhythm, repetition, imagination, joy. That's what we kind of like basically we have that, we consider about when we bring the curriculum. Is it rhythmic, and is it imaginative? Is it, and then also joy in it, and those 2, 3.
Well, like I said, so we have assimilation, and then out of the assimilation process, the children begin to accommodate, and they develop the capacity, they develop the resources for imitation. And then out of imitation, they're able to move toward imagination, where they actually bring their own pictures to their activities. And so that's the kind of process. So they assimilate by taking in and by adapting. And if they are successful at adapting and breaking down, that's the same thing as breaking down the reflexes, so that those reflexes are made so that the reflexes become new ways of new behaviors. And these new behaviors give them the capacity then to more fully imitate. And then out of full imitation, they're able to transform what they come into picture forming. And then out of the picture forming, they're able to re-engage the world.
Yeah. But for our kind of like teachers, bringing is those things, right?
Right.
Those tools
right. We want
for children to adapt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to give a little bit of a summary anyway of what we have did so far before we do this, the chapter on the senses.
Yeah.
Basically, in terms of the life processes, we have this taking in of living materials, meaning that there are etheric forces as well as physical forces. And two things happen, that we take it in and the physical aspect is adapted, as well as the etheric aspect of what we take in is adapted. Both need to be adapted and transformed and changed for the use of the child. Now, we got to look at heredity, and the ego working in this process. And so we brought the image that heredity can be imagined analogous to puzzle pieces. They already are being pre-shaped to fit together in a certain way. But as he says, it's the etheric forces that really direct the development. Even though the way you can develop and mature has been laid out, that's going to be directed by the etheric forces. And continuing the analogy of the puzzle, that's the same as if a human being who has a puzzle who decides to sort things into corner pieces and different color regions. That's how the etheric is working. So the heredity is the shape of the puzzle, but the etheric force is that work that the human being does to sort things, to facilitate the process of putting the puzzle together. And then, as you've already mentioned, according to Piaget, in terms of his learning process, we have the taking in and the adapting, which is assimilation, and then and breaking down as going from assimilation to accommodation, so that the way that we work on the content of what we take in creates resources, physical, behavioral resources that allows the child to imitate fully. And if the child can imitate fully, then out of that imitation they can start doing picture forming that will give them that will present to the soul a really clear picture of the world, which we're going to talk about more today, because that's talking about what happens with the senses. As he starts this chapter, he talks about how the same thing that happens to material, living material, also happens to the content of the senses. So the life processes that work on living material also work on the content of the senses. So in the same way that material things are taking in, the content of the senses are taking in, and then that content of the senses is adapted, it's broken down, it's sorted, it's used for the maintenance of the body, and it's used also for growth and reproduction. Those same processes are going to work on the content of the senses as well as, just like they work on the content of the living material that we take in as food.
I think I got that basic flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing, it's not, we talked about the cosmic and the earthly child, and I kind of like feel really, okay, I understand the cosmic child, and then thinking about that way, it's a lot of children are cosmic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is a tendency in our time for children to be cosmic.
Yeah.
In the sense that they live more really in the senses than they do in the life processes. You know, they live more in the senses. They are, and they bring a little bit of their own picture into the world already. They bring a picture from pre-life, and that picture then is always trying to inform, what they're receiving from the world. So they never really get the benefit of what is coming toward them from the environment, from the outside world. They don't get the benefit because they're already bringing something from pre-life. And they have to learn that whatever the purpose of that is only going to be revealed if it's transformed in its activity of taking up what's coming to them at the world. But a lot of times it's very hard for those children to take up and apply the life processes to what is coming toward them, and so.
So then my question is also the children's drawing. Children's drawing is almost like a pre-life they are bringing, but they can't draw archetype.
And that's
so I was wondering, then why is that?
That's because of this whole thing of the children are, as he says now, they're growing down, and they're maturing up and waking up.
Yeah.
So even though they have brought these archetypes from pre-life, their ability to articulate that is affected by the lack of maturation. So even though, in a sense, it's like they have a picture that they can't articulate. They can't articulate because the reflexes haven't really, they haven't developed the resources, to articulate or to imitate. So there's two things going on. They're articulating whatever they brought in, but they also need to imitate what's coming toward them. And if they don't mature correctly, then both of those will be compromised. And so we get children who we look at, we see that they have the pictures they're bringing from the previous life themselves are already compromised by their inability to articulate what they have.
So that's also a lot of frustration is happening. Maybe they have it, but they can't express that.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, that's why they're under stress. That's why those children, and that's why they end up compensating. They try to suppress and compensate compensate for those reflexes, but then they're under stress. Right at the beginning of this chapter, he talks about the four necessities for sense perception, what has to happen. And if these things don't happen, then of course the senses experiences are going to be compromised. The pictures presented to the soul are going to be compromised. And so he talks about on the physical level that you have to have full development. That's what we're talking about. There can be a lack of development on the physical level. You know, in the senses. The senses are physical things, and in the physical sense, they have to develop. Your eyes and everything have to develop. And then there's the etheric level, which is keeping the sense healthy. The sense has to be maintained, has to be healthy, and talk more about how these things are accomplished. And then on the astral level, you have to have an awake soul. If you don't have an awake soul to receive the pictures, then of course the sense perception will also be compromised. And then he says on the level of the ego, you have to have the will to perceive. There has to be this willingness, this vital will. Without those four things, then sense perception will be compromised, leading to things like we just talked about, leading to a poor articulation of the archetypal pictures, you know, poor imitation. So without this type of development, then the senses experience will be compromised, and therefore the motor experience will also be compromised.
So then the earthly child who opposite, they are physically ready, but don't have previous memory.
Right, exactly. They're being really impacted by what's coming in. It's not being adapted. It's not being, accommodation isn't happening for them, not because they're resisting, but because they simply don't have, like I said, any pre-life experience that guides the reworking of what's coming at them. You know, like the cosmic child is like pushing it away, because they have these strong...
my own picture.
Right.
And I can't really have a space to, or maybe...
But in the other case, you still have to rework what comes at you. And the earthly child is having trouble reworking it. You still have to make it your own. You still have to adapt it. You still have to break it down. And the earthly child was not pushing away, not overly projecting. They still are just they're just assimilating mostly, and they're not accommodating. So in a sense, you have an over accommodation on the part of the cosmic child, and you have over assimilation on the part of the earthly child.
Do you have any example of very good earthly child sample? Children who we know.
Right.
If I hear my classroom, really cosmic, a lot of cosmic.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember back to, I'm trying to remember younger children, of course. Well, I mean, you would think that, think about it, it's kind of interesting, because a child, I think, a lot of children who, you got this thing where it gets confusing is when they compensate. Both children will compensate because of lack of development. And the compensation can make them look very similar. The way they compensate may be the same. And so sometimes that creates a screen. You can't, well, we see this child is sitting on their legs, and this child is sitting on their legs. And
walking with toes.
And you know, so they kind of look like they're in the same kind of place.
Yeah.
But you have to look closely to see trying to think of a good example. What about this? Let me look in the last class. In the last class, my last class, who would I consider an earthy child? Yeah, I mean, I can't really get the one good earthy child. The children I know are quite a while ago.
Elka?
I wouldn't. It's kind of like, again, I don't know if Elka's coming, because Elka had the brain problem.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell now with Elka if she was really earthy or not, or if she was diminished because of the injury she had. An earthy child is someone who does seem to, one child is having a picture, and they try to impose the picture. That's the cosmic. The earthy child, it's not a picture, it's behavior that they're opposing. They have behaviors they bring in, and they're trying to fit everything into their behaviors that they have, that they've brought in. So that's one reason they have delayed reflexes, because they are trying to utilize those reflexes, you know. But a cosmic child has delayed reflexes because they are not utilizing. They're resisting the utilization, so they aren't developing them. Whereas you have one who's using them and learning to use them rather than learning new ways. They're just using the tools they have available, and they actually try to use those tools to the best of their ability. Where a cosmic child doesn't use the reflexes as much, and so the reflexes then stay undeveloped. So in both of them, you have a lack of development for different reasons.
It's William?
Yeah.
You know William Hunter, you remember? The little William, always. So.
Oh, William. Oh, you mean one that I was working with?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say he would tend to be earthy. The thing you got to watch out with is how the children, how they're met. So how they respond to being met. So you might have a child who is essentially earthy. Basically, they're in their will forces, and they're just basically utilizing their will forces, and not really. And yeah, I would say he was definitely earthy, because this problem, the reason I didn't do the cylinder thing is that I wanted him to stop and bring his other senses. So he could not just use his will, but to stop and see, and then start making accommodations. And so I would say an earthy child is going to be less in their senses. They're going to be more in their will. And you're trying to get them to make an accommodation by waking up a little bit more in the sense. And so if they're doing something in the will, it can cause them to take note in a different way and bring a different impulse rather than just what's coming out of the will. And so that's really, so if you see a child who's really into their senses, then that's going to be more of a cosmic child. And there are children who don't do anything because they're into their senses. They're just looking and tasting and smelling and doing that all the time. But they're not doing, you know.
You mean not really meaningful? Meaningful. That's why also, we read about that. Abby brought the article from her training. I think earthly children's movement are chaotic.
Right, exactly. Because it wouldn't be so chaotic if they could stop.
No purpose.
They could stop in the senses, you know. Like, you know, I just move if I don't ever look at this, but if I stop and look at it, then I'll get more purpose in the action. And so that means the senses aren't engaging as much.
Do you know that Sophia Ovachkin, the Claire's classroom, a girl?
I know the name. I don't have a picture in my mind.
I was wondering if she is the one
Sophia.
more particular.
Yeah,
like
Sophia.
Earthly child.
I can't get a picture of her. No, I can't get a picture.
Her behavior is more like animal-like behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Everything very well, but she doesn't really bring in her own picture, but immediately she just, if she sees things, immediately want to go and then grab it, or immediately try to know, kind of like almost it's the will. It's really hard for her to hold the will.
Hold it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
the thing is
no
that
resistance. She doesn't show much resistance about.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell though, because still the question is it intent, or is it responsive? Mm-hmm. So like she could have a like for instance, you talked about animals, and you think about the 12 zodiacs, and say for instance, someone could be living out of the influence of one of the zodiacs, and whenever they meet anything in the world, they immediately respond out of that. So that's more cosmic. But if it appears to not have any, because if it has a particular character to it, then it's probably more cosmic. So if they respond in a particular characteristic way, like if I could say that's a lion, if I could say, oh, that's an elephant, if I could characterize the child's behavior, then it's probably cosmic. If I can't characterize it, then it's probably more earthly.
Yeah, I think maybe she's cosmic. I don't know. Her behavior like more like a, the girl who raised by wolf.
Mm-hmm.
No human being.
Right.
Kind of feels that kind of behavior.
And so it's hard to tell, because I would have to see if I could characterize her. You haven't really characterized her. You said she's animal-like. That's very general. But is there a particular animal? Would you say she's wolf-like? Not that she's acting like the girl who was raised by a wolf, but is she like the archetype of wolf?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, so it may not be. I mean, you have a clear. You don't have any clear influence, cosmic influence there. So she might be earthly. There's no, even though if she doesn't have any clear cosmic influence that you can perceive.
So that's why I really understand about that. Feels like I'm more getting it more about cosmic children, and then thinking about that, I can say in my head, yeah, it's the opposite of they do. And who is that then? I couldn't really tell for what kind of behavior, and then clearly. So how do I see earthly child?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that William is definitely an earthly child, because when we think about William, we even the way we chose to address his issue, we addressed it by waking up his senses, which you wouldn't necessarily be doing with a cosmic child. And therefore giving him the capacity to hold his will back. With a cosmic child, you're trying to get the child to live more out of the will impulse, and to come into the world without so much of a picture always determining what they're going to do, to meet the world on its own terms a little bit. And that's and that's not what we were asking for William. So you would think he's a more earthly child.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other thing he did in this chapter, after talking about the four necessities for developing sense perception, he talked about where the senses that were directed in different aspects, like the senses that were directed toward the body, the senses that were directed toward the environment, and the senses that were directed toward the spiritual, which we pretty much have heard these before. And of course we know the four lower
environment.
And we usually talk about the four lower senses as the ones that are directed toward the body: the touch, the light, the movement, and the balance. Those are the senses he says are directed toward the body. And he says towards the environment, of course, you have smell, taste. He calls it color and temperature, which is smell, taste, sight, and warmth is what we usually say. And then ones that are directed toward the spiritual, tone or sense of hearing, sense of word, and form, sense of thought, and sense of the other, or the I, the ego, which we're pretty familiar with that. A lot of the books on the senses articulate that.
Yeah.
What I wanted to, and then he basically went through these 4 necessities for sense perception and talked a little bit more like what it looks like. And so he said to fully develop a sense, the sense organ must be used. Like if I'm born, and even if I never use my eyes for some reason, then I can't develop my sight. If I never use my hearing, so if I never experience touch, then the sense of touch will go undeveloped. If I never really work with my sense of well-being, and then my sense of life would be underdeveloped. Since if I don't really move, like today, we have so many people who are sedentary children, so their sense of movement isn't truly developed. And then if we don't really work against gravity, if a young child is put in a swinger and things like that, so they don't have to push themselves up and pull themselves up against gravity, then the sense of balance will go undeveloped. They have to be used. All these senses have to be used if they're going to be fully developed, which is his first criteria for the sense being able to present a true picture to the soul. And then he talks about healthy senses. What does it mean to have a healthy sense? And he says one thing is that all the senses, if they're healthy, they have to function rhythmically. I mean, it's like just like our eyes, our eyes are open and then they are closed. Everything is rhythmic. Breathing is rhythmic. Everything has its rhythmic element. Even hearing has a rhythmic element too. Without that rhythmic element, then the health of the sense is going to be compromised. And then the other thing which is really interesting, because he said the senses must work on their content in the same manner as the life processes work on material that it takes in. So when a sense takes something in, it goes through the same 7 life processes. So our eyes do the same thing. They take in, they adapt, they break down, they sort. So these same 7 life processes are working on the content of each of the senses. And so that's an important thing to kind of look at when you are.
Yeah, when I read the eye part, he talked about those life senses. Yeah, never thought about it.
Right. So that's something that I think that's the etheric element working. And so as teachers, we're working primarily with etheric, so we can be looking and see not only that the children are taking things in, but what are they adapting what they take in? Not just in this case, we're talking about the sense content. We're not talking about food. We're talking about the sense content, whatever it may be. They have to adapt it and make it their own. How are they breaking down that content? Sorting it, it's like in hearing. When we get, eventually, hearing has to be broken down into syllables and different things. We need to differentiate in the hearing. So all these 7 life processes must engage the sense content. So for health, you have to have this rhythmical element, and then you got to have the 7 life processes engaging the sense content if the senses are going to be healthy. And then the other thing he talks about is the soul must be able to direct its capacities toward the outer world. And so we have these soul capacities. So when I'm taking something in a sense of what we were talking about earlier, we're talking about the archetypes, the ability of, we already have this inner picture of the world. can it be articulated? Can the soul actually use its own resources to address the world and direct the senses, to make a bridge between our inner life and our outer life? Can we actually do that? That's exactly what he talks about, is that, this bridge has to be built, and it's the soul capacity being directed toward the outer world is what allows us to really perceive the world. If we don't do that, then it's going to be, I'll give you a concrete example. There's a kind of thinking called transduction, and what that looks like with children. When a child sees a horse and calls it a dog, that's called transductive thinking. And what I'm doing in that moment, the child has an inner picture of dog, and they are using that picture of dog to make a connection with what's in the world. So now it seems like an error, but even though it's an error, it's a demonstration of an effort on the part of the young child to make sense of the world. Four-legged things are dogs, because I'm familiar with dogs, and this is four-legged. And so they're actually then asserting their inner life, into the world. So we talked about how that can be dysfunctional if it's just a picture from the pre-life. But the picture, so we have to do both. We have pictures from the pre-life that we are addressing, and then we have to make accommodations. And we have pictures from just living, pictures that we form, that we have to be able to also, define the world with, and then make accommodations when we need to. But we still have to do that process of working out of our previous experience. We have to bring that to the world. And then if the world requires accommodations, hopefully we have that flexibility to make accommodations. But initially, we still have to be able to direct, our soul capacities toward the understanding of the world, whichever they might be. And the last one he says is the will to perceive, that it's not only responsive, but it's intensive, that we have intent. And he gives the example of the difference between a child who is just listening and a child who tries to read a book, because that's an intent to use their hearing. Because they know that the book is a story, and they have the intent to bring the sense to bear toward having some experience in the world. Mm-hmm. And we can look and see what children are just responsive and what children are intensive. What do they do in their environment that shows that they're anticipating the use of their sense, either sight or hearing or touch even. Some children, want to express their touch, and they want to set up play activities in water and things like that, that they know they're going to have an experience of touch. That's an intensive thing. If the child just asks, can I do water play? Can I do sand play? Or the child says, can I read a book? All of those are intents. They have taken the sense to an intent level, not just responsive level.
So that's they are using their will.
Mm-hmm. That's their will coming through in an intensive way, not just a responsive way. The will could be responsive, which means something that happened in the environment that initiates their will, but the will can be intensive, where they want to have an experience of the senses, and they initiate the contact with the world. So, and if we don't have that intensive relationship with the senses, that we intend to use them, then they won't fully develop. So,
yeah, it's also, parents' conversation, they always often say that about their child is a strong-willed child. Mm-hmm. What they want to get it, that kind of will. They talked about it, said, well, we're talking about the more will, something they are achieving, or something right. They are more to go through something difficult and go through that kind
Right,
of way we were
exactly.
talking about it.
Right.
And
So
yeah.
they're talking about strong responsive will, which means they get a response to something in the world and they can't let go. But we're talking about, we want to develop a strong intensive will. We want them to get inner, you know, if the child, and some children do have strong intensive will. They have inner intents. You know, I want to read this book, and they can be very strong. Read the book, read the book. But other children, it could be just that they see the book, and when they see the book, they just say they want to read the book, but they really wouldn't have. They're not really thinking. They're not really experiencing an impulse to engage their hearing. You know, because then you start reading the book to them, they don't even listen. So you can tell the difference. I mean, I actually at the preschool, I used to go in sometimes while they were changing diapers in the toddler room, and I would sit down, and the children would bring me books to read, right? And one little boy, who I would say is an earthy child, he would go get a book and bring it to me, and I would have him sit in a little chair, and this other little girl would be with him. The little girl would sit and listen, but even though he would go get the book, he could never sit and listen.
Yes.
You know, so
also he'll ask again, read it again.
Right, exactly. But he really wasn't having the intention and experiencing pleasure or anticipating the pleasure of using the hearing and hearing that. He just had a response to me coming in and then thinking, oh, it's time to go get a book. He goes get the book, he brings it, but he's not intending to get anything out of the reading of the book. You know. And so then he talks about the education of the senses. And he says, as the senses engage and develop perception of content, as well as a corresponding inner capacity. So he talked about there's these twofold things that happen. The sense is developed, the perception of the content, I guess. Say if I may learn, he talked about music, how a child learns to appreciate music. They not only have the skill of being musical in the world, but inwardly they develop an inward understanding of the quality of music. And that inward capacity then can be used, to achieve different things in the world. You know, and that's what we always want. For every sense perception that we develop, like if I develop a clear picture of trees, well, that clear picture of trees isn't just an ability to see trees in the world clearly. I get an inner sense of a quality that is tree, the quality of trees. Like when I look at a tree, you may get the impression of something that stands tall and strong. So that's the inner response. So I can perceive the tree, but I can also have an inner capacity that emerges out of the developed perception. And this is very important because this is really how we educate ourselves through the senses. If we don't develop a really a good perception, then we won't have this inner response. And that's really the goal, is for human beings, it's not so much the goal for other animals, but as we develop, we want to not only develop the ability to perceive clearly out here, we want the ability to take that clear perception and experience it as an inner quality. And then that inner quality becomes the way that we work in the world toward understanding. Because that's what analogy does. Analogy says, oh, this is like a tree. That's because we have inwardly preserved the quality of the perception of a tree. And then I can use that in analogy to other things. And so that's a very important aspect of the educating of the senses, that the senses engage and develop perception of content, and they also develop a corresponding inner capacity. And that inner capacity is what we use really for understanding in the world.
Yeah, that also, I really strongly feel about the world of education is doing.
Exactly.
And then teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he was doing for first graders. He really didn't make any product or something, but appreciation how trees, the what is called pattern on the tree,
Mm-hmm.
Just standing and then appreciating the beauty of the piece of
grain.
tree grain, yeah. And that's a very, very good thing for first graders too.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. They get that inner quality of the beauty of the wood,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that can live in them and be a source for metaphor or analysis,
Yeah.
to other things that happen in their life.
Well, when we are talking about that, kind of a budget cut and everything, and then woodwork, and then the first grade teacher said, he doesn't really do much children mostly doing that. And I said, that's a very good thing to do for first grade.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How bringing the appreciation and then other word, the respect, or this, that's a word, appreciation, and then kind of like just appreciating its beauty itself. It's not a really form.
Right, exactly. And just experiencing the phenomena of wood, and in the way, well, the whole purpose of this is we want a picture presented to the soul that awakens the soul, and what awakens the soul is beauty, and so if that element of the activity is what the child is allowed to experience, and we know that the picture presented to the soul is going to be useful for the soul. So a lot of pictures presented to the soul that are just dead. The soul doesn't really have any response to those pictures, and that's exactly what this whole chapter is about. Is how through our 12 senses are pictures presented to the soul that allow the soul to mature toward a recognition that the connection to the spiritual world still exists. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is that the human being, of course, in the process of growth and maturation, is disconnected from that direct relationship with the spiritual world. But through this environment, pictures are presented to the soul that allow it to have the revelation that connection still exists. And so that's one of the primary things that we're doing.
I think exactly that explanation is talking about myself too, about the ego, also bringing the form in me. Mm-hmm. It's a really immature because I think I was very maybe earthly child, and then I have my own picture of tree, and then so someone bringing. When I was young, someone bringing that kind of beauty said, no, I know what the tree is, and resisting. And then becoming adult, finally, realizing about the sense. And then, but when child is maybe that kind of appreciation went through child age, mm-hmm. they are bringing that one into the form now, right?
Exactly.
Becoming adult. Right. And then my immature things, my adult age finally meeting that beauty, mm-hmm. and then having hard time to bring it to the form.
Right.
So that's what I'm hearing. Exactly. This is really exactly what's happening to me.
Yes. And to a lot of us, and then unfortunately you were able to take up that struggle as an adult. A lot of people never are able to take up the struggle to remediate mm-hmm. That whatever they didn't get access to as a child. So the last thing he does in this chapter is he summarizes a little bit of a soul learning that can come through each of the lower senses. And he says, which we deal mostly with touch, life, movement, and balance. Mm-hmm. And he talks about through touch, we learn that this is our bodies. That because we distinguish between what's outside and what's inside. We learn boundary. And so we get a sense that this is ours, and this is me, and this not me. And so through the sense of touch, we get that sense of body ownership. This is my body, and that's a very important thing to understand, that touch must be brought in the appropriate way so that we don't contradict that. We don't want to through touch to teach a child that this is not their bodies, which a lot of times happens in different ways, And so we want that there's a boundary, and they have to learn that boundary is there to keep them secure. Well, now these are not from his writings, but these are what I have developed on my own, and I have brought before at the Waldorf School. Out of the perception of boundary, we have the cognitive capacity for correspondence. Boundary says that teaches us that things are separate and they have their own place. Well, when we're learning to count or even learning to learn the letters, we must learn that each thing has its own place. That's how correspondence. When I count, some children when they count, they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they finally learn to go actually correspond each number with touching something. Correspondence is actually very, very important. I mean, I see it even today with older children who have a lack of correspondence. Correspondence isn't well developed. All higher academics is going to be very difficult because everything, you can't correspond. Everything is going to be jumbled in your head.
Yeah.
You have to learn to correspond. That this corresponds to this. This concept corresponds to this. And correspondence is really weak in a lot of children today, all the way up through high school.
Yeah, that's one of the things when we learned about the math in the school time, and we don't utilize anything later life.
Right.
It's just all like just memory here, just memorizing here,
right.
And then just letting go all. So
right.
those, we talked about the math is also problem-solving skill.
Exactly.
You develop. And then we learned math only in just memorizing things and then do the test and then just let
right.
go.
Right.
So it didn't really go through
right.
at all.
You know what happened? You had the Greeks who really developed math initially for the purpose of educating the thinking. And then we had the Asian people who worked out of math out of the feeling life. Math, for them, the reason they developed it, they got a sense of the whole and the feeling and the rhythm and the movement. That's why we got algebra out of the East, the Persians and whatnot. But then we got the medieval time, when math got into the West, really the more advanced math into medieval times. There was a time where they needed to use it for bookkeeping and clerking. Mm-hmm. And so our whole academic system approach to math in the Western world was all about remembering how to do these algorithms, to do the arithmetic, so that you could be a clerk, and that's what, and we still teach like we did in the medieval days. We don't teach like the Greeks did. Math was just really there for thinking, to educate the thinking, and we don't teach much about the feeling of math at all. We teach pretty much like we want you to be a clerk. And we know that's not even necessary anymore because we have computers and calculators. So we don't need medieval math anymore. What we really need are people who can feel and think about math. And it's not, even though they're trying to make the switch, the teachers don't really understand what the attempt is. Like we have the Common Core. Common Core is not bad at all. A lot of it's like Waldorf. But the teachers don't have any sense of it at all. They're still thinking in a medieval way. So when they see Common Core, they say, what does this got to do with, well, that's not the way I learn math, because, they don't get it. And so they can't teach it. So even though we have a curriculum which is more toward educating problem solving, the teachers don't feel math in as a tool for problem solving.
Well, nowadays Asians do even more than Western people without feeling math.
Right. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
much more machinery.
Exactly. They really have learned to use their But see, the thing about it is that they have stronger memory because they don't they're because their society isn't so sedentary yet. 100 years ago, we had strong memories too because we still used our bodies more. And so they are actually good at our kind of math because they still have strong memories. Western children are poor at this kind of math because they don't have strong memories anymore because they live such a sedentary life, And so, so then he talks about the life sense, and he says the life sense tells you that this body, it's not that you own the body, but that you are your body. It teaches you not that like I can own this, or I can be it. That you are the body. That you identify your consciousness with your body, and that's what the life sense does. And that's a really important thing because what happens is that then you can experience your wholeness as body, and you can see that all your parts, your arms and your legs and whatnot, are part of your body, and they are you. And that's different from just knowing that there's a difference between you and the world. Like in the first case, in touch teaches you that I'm here and you're there. But not so much I'm here, but my body's here, and there's a separation between the outer world and my body. The life sense, though, teaches you to identify yourself as the body. You experience the body. It's like when you meditate or do meditation and you close your eyes and you begin to experience your body. You can be aware of the body as part of you, as you. And because in a sense, the younger child doesn't have that experience yet of themselves inhabiting the body. But once you know that you inhabit the body, then you also have a sense of wholeness. Because the whole body is you. You feel that wholeness.
That's like a starting. You have a capacity of empathy.
Right. Because you begin to experience your inner life, and then you can relate that to somebody else's inner life. And it also develops a cognitive capacity for analysis because once you can experience a whole, you can talk about what parts belong to the whole, which is what analysis does. Analysis says, okay, what are the parts that belong to this whole? And you can experience that. And that's very important in the second grade. These things sort of move. In the first grade, this sense of boundary and correspondence is really important for the child to do the first grade curriculum. In second grade, it's very important that the child has a sense of wholeness. They can experience wholeness of things. Because if they can't experience the wholeness of things, they won't be able to do the second grade curriculum very well. They won't, because you have to make whole words, whole sentences. You've got to experience the wholeness of things, and you have a sense of that. You've got to experience the wholeness of a number. This is number 10. And here's all the different ways you can express 10. You've got to experience wholeness when you move to the second grade and you're trying to acquire reading and writing, and you're trying to acquire the ability to do regroup in math, to know that 9 and 8 creates a new whole, 10 plus 5 more. So you've made a whole out of those parts, and all of that is important. So if you don't develop this strong body identity, then you won't have a sense of wholeness. It'll be hard to have a sense of wholeness. Another thing that gives you a child who has this life sense developed can remember what they did in the morning because they can remember their whole self. And so they can have episodes. They can remember their wholeness in episodes going through time. And without that sense of body identity, you can't put yourself in a different time. You can only be here now. But the ability to put yourself in a different time depends on how you identify with your body. And you can see your consciousness move through time. You have episodic memory.
So that's why they can learn the things about a good deed and then also Aesop, like a clear consequence.
Right. Because they now can put themselves in different situations. They begin to be imagining themselves and how they'll feel in a different situation too. He talks about this as being the development, I'm pretty sure it's this one, doubt and shame come with this one. And so you can start having that sense of that when you develop body identity. And then at a movement, he says what comes is body confidence. You become confident in your body in the sense that first you're aware that this is my body, and I identify with it, and I live within it. But then the question is, are you confident in engaging the world out of that body? You know, and so movement is what gives us the ability to develop the confidence in terms of how our body can interact and impact the external world. We get body confidence, become confident in this body that we are out of movement. And so if we don't have a well-developed movement, we're not going to have body confidence. And the other thing that we get, we begin to perceive change. So each one of these things, this is the inner experience you get. This is what you perceive. And this is the cognitive capacity that develops. So the cognitive capacity for touch is a sense of you can perceive boundary, not cognitive capacity, but the perception. You can perceive boundary. For life, you can perceive wholeness. For movement, you can perceive change. You get the ability to perceive change. Things change, and you change things. And then for balance, you perceive difference. You get the ability to perceive difference. The body being aware of difference. And then you develop, out of that perception, you develop a cognitive capacity. The cognitive capacity you develop out of perceiving boundary is correspondence. I'm able to say, this goes with this. I can develop correspondence. Out of wholeness, you get the ability to develop the cognitive capacity for analysis. Because I can see the whole in its parts. So I can say, this is a whole, and I can analyze it into its parts, what belongs to that whole. In change, you get synthesis. Change says that I can watch things change, and then I can predict that they go together. It's the flip of this. Here you have things, the whole is already there, and you break it into its parts. Here you have to be able to realize that the whole isn't there, but you can see how things change and realize what their nature is and realize they go together.
How it's developed.
Right. So I can say, these things that seem to be different actually go together. Because I've seen things change before. So even though things are changed and change, they still can be part of the same thing. So that's synthesis. And then, of course, from difference, you get the cognitive capacity to compare, to know what is similar, and to know what is different. Contrast, compare and contrast. And so these are what he gives in the text. He talks about the body awareness that develops out of the development of those sense. Now, these are what I consider what out of this body awareness you develop the ability to perceive certain things. And out of this ability to perceive certain things, you develop cognitive capacities.
So that's a higher sense.
Right. So if you have these cognitive capacities, then you can learn in an academic setting. So I can always look. If I have a child having trouble with this correspondence, I know that touch is an issue. I'm going to come back and do some work in touch. If I have a child having a hard time knowing that these parts belong to something, like if they say, okay, tell me all the ways you can make 10, and they can't think of the different ways, that means they don't have a sense of wholeness.
Like a 2 and an 8 or 7 and 3.
Right.
Different.
They can't. If they can't recognize they're all the same, and they go with 10. Then I got to look at their own body identity and sense of wholeness has been compromised, and I need to work on that. And then if they can't, if I can't, like, you know how you show a sequence of things and you ask the child what comes next, and that comes from this ability. You know, they can perceive the change, and they can perceive, this comes next. They can do that synthesis. And that's related to body confidence. So I probably found children who don't have much body confidence probably don't perceive change very well, and they aren't able to synthesize. You know. And then this is interesting because this is body pride, or the sense that my body is unique, that develops through the sense of balance. And so that's what I'm saying. I know that I'm different. I'm unique. And so you're contrasting and comparing. And you develop the difference to compare. Now this stuff is important, like when you get to fractions. Because fractions you have to learn how to look at compare. Fractions are comparison. What is 2 compared to 4? That's how fractions work. And also in the 4th and 5th grade, we start looking at zoology, and we start looking at comparing things. What's this fish look like compared to this animal? We start comparing and contrasting things. At the same time, we start doing fractions. You got to look at the differences and the similarities. And so it's saying that body pride and a sense of body uniqueness is an important quality to look for, with the ability to do these things.
Can you explain me a little bit more about also what you explained that's understandable, 2, 4, 6, what is the next 8? How to relate to the speech?
Like when synthesis in speech?
Yeah, movement is also relating to higher sense of the speech.
Right, right. And so when you basically, this is a real issue that you run into today. When children use words today, the words they aren't living. They're not associated with an actually young experience in the movement. A lot of times the reason children can't get concepts is because they don't have any actual inner sense of, like, here's an example, like when you draw, I can draw this on the board. Let me see, you want one for speech. Let me think of one for speech. Math is easy for me. But for speech, when you talk about synthesis, what you doing for speech? Oh, here it is. What do you do in the 3rd grade? In the 3rd grade, you start introducing the children the quality of the word. This is an action word. This is a doing word. You teach them the 4 parts of speech. And you expect them to be able to take the 4 parts of speech and learn to write a complete sentence, to synthesize those. So by getting a sense of what, now they've been speaking all along, they've been using these words. They can make a complete sentence going from the whole to the parts because they have learned it inwardly. Now we want them to be able to identify the parts and be able to recognize that they put the parts back together correctly. And so
it's challenging.
And so in the 3rd grade, I'll be teaching it. I'll be saying, okay, look at your sentence. Do you have an action word in your sentence? Do you have a naming word in your sentence? Every sentence must have a naming word and an action word. And so they have to be able to begin to be able to synthesize a sentence, to put it back together. They have learned it to come from the whole and to just speak right out of their own being by their memory, by their learning a whole sentence that they've learned. And they're starting to do it at 2 years old. They're speaking out of the whole, what they have heard in their environment. Then they have to start working it the other way. They have to be able to look at, if I write something down, they got to be able to look at it. And if they read it, like they read the boys was. Now they should have an inner sense that something's wrong with that. But they have to be able to look at the parts to tell what's wrong with that when they get to the 3rd and 4th grade. And that's the ability for synthesis. Because if I can look at the parts and say, oh, I don't have an action word, it's missing. The action word is the problem, that's the wrong action word. And then they can learn to adjust things and make the sentence work, synthesize the sentence correctly. But one of the big problems they have here, though, because of movement, like you said, movement, the ability to have a sense, like the ability to sense that is wrong, the boys was, the ability to sense that has to do with your early physical activity. That's something you can experience really as a movement. That whole thing right there, the movement is what is wrong. And it's easy for you. It's hard for us to imagine people who can't do that.
Yeah.
But there are people who can't feel that movement is wrong. That's change. They can. This is about the perceiving change. they can perceive the boys was. They know that that's not the next thing. Just like with the two, just like when you go 2, 4, 6, 8, and if I say 2, 4, 6, 9, they may something wrong.
Yeah.
If I say the boy is, the boys is or something like that, they experience it in the same way.
So if but the child who cannot recognize to look at the part, but that they are maybe speaking right way, right?
Right.
Boy,
But
boys.
if they speak wrong, they won't know it. They're speaking because of memory, because of doing it.
Yeah.
But if I speak to them the wrong way, they won't be able to tell me what's wrong.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I have a hard time because in Japanese we don't have that system of plural and singular. It's all same.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So if you don't experience whatever culture you're in, you have to experience, the changes in the movement in the language of that culture. And if you haven't experienced a change in the movement in that country, it's going to be hard for you to recognize what should go together and what shouldn't go together. So you aren't going to be able to synthesize properly.
Yeah.
When you start actually composing your own writing, you might not synthesize it
About the
properly.
number, singular and plural is hard for me. We don't use that. Just apple is apple, not apples.
Right.
Many apples are many apples.
Right.
Not apples.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
we
That's
use
a good example.
We use the the words, not for the just putting an S.
Right.
Of apple.
Right. So you, in that case, you're going to use an adjective.
Yeah.
Always to precede a noun, and not just imply the adjective with singular and plural and things like that. And so that's a change, a movement that you are familiar with. And we should become familiar. Movement itself teaches that. Mm-hmm. So when we get the language, because we do it in movement all the time. Like we know if I'm running toward that shed, and I know that there's a certain point at which I need to slow down. Mm-hmm. If I don't slow down, I'm going to hit it. A change. There's changes which are necessary in that action. And that capacity to experience the necessity for change in the world becomes something that we then bring into our speech also. And so if we don't have that ability to perceive change, and of course, if we don't have the ability to perceive change, it's going to be hard to be confident too, because to negotiate the world, that's what you're doing all the time. You recognize how far away, how close you are, what kind of things, what adjustments you make. Even the eyes themselves, the eyes look at something, and depending on the angle, that the eye is looking, that's how it tells how far away it is. And these are really subtle developments that are there. And if you don't develop those, then you're going to have a hard time recognizing when you see different changes that those changes fit or not. Mm-hmm. And it's culturally, there's cultural differences, of course. Mm-hmm. So all of this gives I think it gives a really good approach to looking at a child and you ask yourself, you look at a child, how are these life senses involved in viscerally and through the senses in developing the child's soul pictures. That's what it does. We have, on a visceral level, we have like taking in the food, and we have all this interactivity that we do, and we have the life processes are engaging that material stuff that we take in, and process it in a certain way, so that it becomes what we need. And it's also releasing the etheric. It's processing it and releasing the etheric, because the etheric is going to be what's going to really be important. The etheric that's released from the food and the nutrients we take in is going to be the etheric that becomes available for this development of the senses and development of understanding. And so they begin to work together. So when we're looking at a child, you can ask yourself, we're presenting something either through their inner body are we presenting something, to their senses? And we got to ask ourselves, are they going to be able to work on that with their life processes? Or we can ask ourselves, are they working on it? Do we see some block? Is one of those life processes not happening? Are they not adapting? Are they not maintaining? Is growth not happening? Are they not able to really come out of imitation and give birth to imagination? So we're asking ourselves, it's a good tool to use the life processes to ask, how do we perceive that the child is working on the content that we bring to them?
So that when we talked about before about if children are having issue, the assimilation part, we can also look at the curriculum and then all those, like a basic, like all of teachers kind of like a tool we can also look at. But if children who have a accommodation part is having an issue, then we have to we have to ask about also home life.
Right. And then we got to ask ourselves, is there situations where the life processes are compromised? So I'm saying, the thing is, we got to ask ourselves, because I guess primarily we're focusing on this and understanding how the life processes, are a tool, a lens that we can look at. So we can ask ourselves, is there some way that their consumption and digestion of the world is being compromised either in taking in, adapting, breaking down, sorting, maintaining, growing, reproducing, giving new birth, bringing into being. So we want to be able to ask ourselves, can we perceive how that might be compromised? And I think the other thing that we have with this tool here, we can look at, in terms of the four physical, touch, life, movement, we can also look at the cognitive capacity or the perception that seems to be compromised. We can ask, does this child seem to have an inability to perceive boundary? That would be more at your level, because at your level, they're still these perceptions are being developed. At my level, they should be already working on these cognitive capacities. But you can say, does this child have a poor sense of boundary? Does this child not have a sense of wholeness? Can they, if I ask them a question about what they did this morning, can they tell me? If I have something, if I'm reading a story, are they one of the children who can know that I didn't say something that I said yesterday? That's what wholeness is. They get a sense of wholeness. They don't remember exactly how you said it the previous day, but they have an inner whole. And if something is not a part that goes to that, they know it. So if the children who don't perceive that, you can tell that their wholeness is compromised. And then do the children have a sense of change and a sense of difference? So these are lenses that we can use related to the way the life processes are going to be developing these senses. Because life processes are going to be developed through two ways. As he says here, they're going to be healthy because there's going to be rhythm, and then the content is going to be worked on by each of the life processes. So those are the two things we can ask ourselves. Are we helping the child work these senses in a rhythmic way? Are they taking in the content in a rhythmic way? Like, for instance, if I have a child who is experiencing too much, the intensity of touch is not rhythmic in their lives. That would be a problem. Does the child? What about the rhythm in food, in taking in food, so that they can have a real sense of how, when they feel full and when they feel hunger, all these rhythms have to be there as the first way that we make the development of these senses healthy. And then after we ask that question, we got to say, what about the life processes? The child is taking in something. When they take it in, do we see them working on what we take in? Or does it just nothing? Are they just assimilate? We're talking about accommodation. If they're just taking it in and they're not adapting, then we know there's no accommodation. do we see it being broken down? Can they find what, if I bring, say you bring a story, and in the story you have a certain goal, you bring a certain lesson. Can the child experience whatever the fruit of the story is? Are it just, or do they just, let me see. Like, so you tell the story and your intention might be to, you told me about this later on. You told me the other day, last time we met, there was something you were trying to teach some child over and over and they couldn't get it. What was that?
About the leash.
About the leash, right.
Yeah.
And in that sense, you were seeing that whatever you were bringing to them, they couldn't really find the usefulness, the soul food that you were bringing in that conversation. They couldn't extract it, the nutrition that you were bringing, And so that would then be an indication that life process of breaking down, is something that maybe you need to look at even on another level, So, that's the ideal, I think, in terms of making this useful as a lens, is to be able to do that.
It's interesting, the story, they imitate my story. Usually, of course, children cannot retell the story or tell, just only spread the things out and then put the silk cover and then singing the song of the story fairies. Mm-hmm. And also, how do I bring story? Always I bring the story in a basket. So all the children want to have a basket.
Right,
I want to put the story fairy, can I have a basket?
Right.
And then put all the blocks and then the silks and then spread the silks and then blocks and then cover the silk and then singing. Mm-hmm. That's, I really see, they are doing right thing.
Yes. So, because we got to ask because the whole point is that it's working in the senses in a certain way.
Yeah.
The visual and the tactile, and are they initiating? Having the will to perceive. Mm-hmm. Are they initiating those sense experiences that you brought to them? And that's a good point because with the whole leash thing, you should think about that then. What's the sense experience that you think is going to motivate the engagement with the leash? See what I'm saying?
Owner and then animal.
Right, but there's got to be some sense experience in that though, see? Mm-hmm. It can't be just concept that they need to remember that the animal has to have. What do you bring to that experience that engages their senses that they want to redo? Mm-hmm. Just like you said, when they redo the story, they bring the silks and the blocks. There are sense experiences that cause them to re-engage. So in that situation, I would ask, well, is there something about the silk? I mean, the leash? And is it pretend? Or they pretend to have a leash or what? What's the sense experience? Like when you actually do that, when they do that, do they just pretend to have a leash or is it an actual thing they tie on or what? What happens?
I mean about the leash?
Yes, when the children are actually doing that in the classroom, is that just an imaginary process?
No. I have those woven yarn things, the big one. And then when children want to be an animal and then owner and then I give a leash and then they can take care of their own animal. Yeah.
And so what I'm saying, in that experience, that woven thing, which is a sensory thing, you can ask yourself, for this particular child, does the child have a lack of access to a sensory experience for some reason?
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to bring the children at that age is the sense engagement, the sense content. And maybe the sense content is what is absent for that child, as opposed to something thinking. Yeah. Not that the child's not getting the concept, the child's not having the interest in doing it because there's no sense content for them.
I don't know, I brought a little story for that, just like a little book, someone was a family of dogs. And then I put a leash, each one, daddy leash and mommy leash, and then going to the park with leash, and and then take the leash off, and then going home, put the leash again, and then coming back. I didn't do so many times, but
and in that case, it probably would be good to have an auditory thing like something. Like they said, that they might sing the song. So in that case, you might have something rhythmic, a song that engages their senses in that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what brings them back to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just would be indicated from what he's saying here.
Okay. Good. All right. I think we passed the time a lot,
Okay.
but can I ask one more
Sure.
learning question? The child who are very shy, and then who doesn't do imitation, but when they go home, they all imitate.
Mm-hmm.
That's I don't need to worry so much.
Right.
That case. Right.
Because that's what you would say there. That's a question of the child being able to have no shyness. Is basically for young children is the inability to do that bonding transference. You know, they bond with their parents,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't able to fully transfer that sense of security.
Yeah.
You know, with someone else, and so you know, it doesn't mean that they're not. Like you said, they don't have the ability,
Mm-hmm.
and so you would be looking more and more at what can happen to help that child do that ability to, and it also relates to body identity and wholeness. Like, you know, can the child? How old is this child?
4.
Yeah, 4 years old. Can the child talk about what they do at home?
Well, yeah,
and what they're going to do later?
Play is pretty healthy.
But if you go up there and say, what are you going to do when you go home? You know, and if the child can then have episodic memory and have a whole picture of what they might have done before and tell you about it, that can help.
Speech is very, very developed. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
That's so well developed. So it's maybe different then but can they do that though? Even though they may have developed speech, they may not. In response to your request,
Mm-hmm.
are they able to recall something in their life and tell you about it? They are.
Yeah.
So they have that episodic memory, and they can bring it to bear. So that means that, see, some children who are shy, they really have shyness because they can't bring their home life into the room.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel alone because they don't even have the memory. They lose the memory of their connection. So if you can give them the memory of their connection,
Mm-hmm.
then they're more secure.
Yeah.
But in this case, it sounds like this is more a cosmic child that just has a lot of stuff coming.
Parents are also saying the child is such a perfectionist.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So that could be a whole other different thing.
Yeah. But the other way is the child is really hardly talked at all in my room. Never had a speech. And then at home, talking.
Right.
And then never do any circle. Yeah, and then at home he talks about what they did, kind of things. I don't really know what exactly he's acting the circle,
Mm-hmm.
but he talks everything what happened. If someone did it.
Right.
At the school, no sound.
Right. And that could be going back to the cosmic child. He could be sitting there totally engaged, you know,
Yeah,
and engaged here.
Yeah.
So therefore, nothing going down into the body.
Yeah.
But then, since they were totally engaged when they got home, they regurgitate all that head engagement that they had. So they sit there engaged in their head, and so they take it all in, and then they can regurgitate it back out. But it's not going into the bodies at all. You know.